We're going to focus on painting objects in a 3D way, which is going to be mostly about adding highlights and shadows and using complementary colors to really make a neutral shade or just shadow on your objects. So I'm going to paint the sphere orange, and I'm going to do this like can or cylinder shape with blue. And I just gave myself a little bit of a background because I know you guys already did that, and that'll really help the objects pop out at you. But you are going to need to do a shadow on the ground, so make sure that that area is dry before you're painting shadows on top. So the sphere is going to be orange, and I'm going to go ahead and take the orange paint and start to do this sphere. You want to paint kind of quickly, because if you can do it quickly enough, you can just mix the highlights and shadows right in there while it's still wet, which will make it look really loose but really shiny and natural. If you have objects that are more fuzzy or just not a smooth object, it might not be necessary to do it while it's still wet, but especially if you have things that are metal, maybe things that are like a smooth plastic, this is going to help a ton in making it look 3D. So, you know, nice edges still. You can always go back and fix that up. But there's my basic color. I'm going to fix this edge a little bit and cover up that purple. Okay, basic sphere. And now while it's wet, I'm saying my light source is coming from here. So the light is going to hit it over here, which is going to give me a highlight. And then I'm going to have a shadow back here. I'm going to start with the highlight. That means I have to wash my brush less. So honestly, it's just a little bit of an easier, lazier way of doing it. I'm going to take a little white, and I'm going to mix a little bit of it with the paint that's already on my brush. So I made a really nice tint. And I'm going to start by putting that here, so that it looks like that light is just falling and like smoothly rolling down the sphere. And then I'm going to go and get even more white for a really bright highlight where it's really just hitting the sphere. And because my ball is round, I'm making it kind of a half circle shape. So hopefully you can see that highlight. If it's not bright enough, I can add more, and you can mix it in less. The more you move your brush, the more you can see it kind of mixes into the orange. So if you want it really bright, put that on there and don't touch it again. It'll be really, really bright. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of a shadow on this side. Now this is just going to be blocked from the light, so what I'm going to do is use its complementary color instead of like black. Black is so strong that I don't want to knock out this orange and make the whole thing kind of gray or muddy looking. But the complementary color should be a way to make it start to be a neutral. Like we talked about how red and green mixed together make brown. Most complementary colors aren't as perfect at making brown, but they definitely kind of knock each other out of being as bright. Remember, if you rinse your brush, you want to dry it off so it's not super wet and just making the whole thing really, really liquidy. So I've got some blue and orange, and you can already tell it's making it way more neutral looking. Now, if that's too much brown, I can always add more orange to it. But remember, I'm going to be mixing this in something that's already orange, so I probably want it a little more blue. Now, while it's wet, I want to try and get in here. The shadow is also going to be kind of that half moon shape. It's really tempting to take this all the way to the edge, but if you look at still lifes, or even when we've practiced drawing still lifes, there's a little bit of an edge that's still going to look nice and orange. I'm wiping off the excess paint so there's less on my brush, and that'll help me use this wet orange to just kind of smooth it in and blend it out. And you can take this pretty high up. But the more smooth it blends, the smoother that transition, the more natural it's going to look, more 3D. And maybe that's not dark enough over there. I can add more, but I'm liking the way that looks. Now I'm going to go do the shadow. I'm definitely going to use some of this neutral color, this complements mixed together in the shadow. So it's not just black. A shadow isn't usually just black. So I'm going to go ahead and mix more of this paint. Remember, I'm just taking bits of it, stirring it up. Oh yeah, it's really dark. I definitely want it darker than usual. More blue this time than before. And now I'm going to add just a bit of that black. And shadows can be tricky. I would recommend drawing it out first. I'm going to just do it right away because I'm not too concerned. If I had more objects, I might be worried about where the shadow's hitting other things. It's definitely gonna hit the bottom of this a little bit and curve out because it's round. Smooth edge. Bring it out. And even though it's a sphere that I'm painting, the shadow isn't a perfect sphere. But adding those neutral, or not neutral, but adding those complementary colors to make a neutral, the blue and the orange, is gonna make the shadow look much more realistic, even though someone looking at it might not be able to tell you, oh, that color's made with a blue and orange brown. But it's gonna make it look much more natural in that 3D shape. So now I'm gonna move on to the can and try and get that done pretty quickly for you too. This one I'm gonna do blue, so you can see how I'm gonna add orange again, but I'm sure you've noticed by now that blue is a much stronger paint color than orange. So this time I'm gonna have to add a lot more of the complement, and also the shadow is gonna hit this object differently because it's a taller, more straight object. So my shadow and highlight, my highlight's gonna be a longer line, and my shadow is gonna kind of be an L shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with painting it kind of blue. This whole top is gonna be a lighter color, so make the whole top a tint, except for this little area where it's gonna kind of sink in and be the shadow inside the can. Mix it up and paint it. I like to paint the whole thing in. Usually if you're just doing one coat, you can see underneath it and know where you need to put your next part. If that's too hard, you can definitely go around it, but it makes getting those edges a little harder. So I always say do a layer and then paint right on top of it, especially when you're trying to do the highlights and shadows. When I think of a pop can, I know that the top is more silver and this will be a color. So I'm gonna, instead of drawing this line in black like a cartoon, I'm gonna do an even brighter highlight. I'm gonna just take white right into that brush that's already blue, and I'm gonna just paint this whole little line to give it that really round look. Now I'm going a little overboard, but I know I'm gonna paint right on top of it next. So remember, add more white, mix it in less if you want it even brighter. And I'm gonna curve it around here a little bit. And it'll be a little darker on this side. Then I'm gonna do that shadow. Before I get too far, I gotta rinse my brush because I've got white on it. I don't wanna make a tone, I wanna make a shade. So we'll get that white off the brush. Get a little black, get a little blue. You could make it a tone. Maybe I will. Switch it up. And then I'm gonna paint this shape. And your guys' brushes are nicer than mine. You can tell I'm using one of the younger grades, so make sure that you're paying attention to how you're using it, making it look really nice. And then the soda can little topper is gonna be shinier again, so I'm gonna take a little more white. And I know that as I paint, this is still wet, so they're still doing that kind of mixing together thing. Might be too much white. We'll see when we look at it. While it's wet, it's so easy to change it. That's why I recommend going pretty quickly and kind of doing like one section at a time. So I think that's too light. So now I can just take that blue and there, I can mix it back in. And not the perfect shape. But I think you can get the idea of how the little pop top works. Then I'm gonna keep this kind of a more basic, still a little light, because I want that shadow on the side of it, right? Or the highlight on the side of it and a shadow on the other side. So this is where I gotta be careful. I don't wanna cover up all that work I just did, but I also need to keep it kind of even so it looks like a 3D object. And then I'm gonna paint this whole thing and come back in and add. So this is where I'm painting quickly, but still effectively and smoothly. I don't wanna take too much time on every single brush stroke because it's really going to be about how I add those highlights and shadows. Not using too little paint, I want it really, really wet. All right. Now, while it's wet, I'm going to add a little more tone there and a highlight right in this corner. So a little tone I'm going to take. I've even got a little black and white mixing right over here. Ooh, a lot of black. Still too much gray in there. There, it's getting more blue, okay. And I'm painting right on wet blue paint, so I don't want to take too long because it's going to mix together anyway. And then I'm going to add a little more on this side where the light isn't going to hit it as much. Wipe it off a little bit. You can wipe it on here if I prefer. And I'm going to get some blue on the tip, just mix it in. And as you work on these, you're going to see what works best for you and how you really see the colors in the objects. I'm now just pulling that kind of gray color down to mix it and blend it a little smoother. But that's why I wanted to make sure I had blue back on my brush. Okay, I need to highlight quick before it dries. It's going to touch almost to that gray. Now I have a lot of white on my brush, so I wipe it off, and then I can kind of mix it in. Okay, I'm going to leave it loose like that for now. I can always come back and edit it. I need a highlight going down this side. So again, dipping that brush straight into white. And I'm going to carefully pull it down here. Now, I would say I still have a lot of white on here, so wipe it off. And then do that blending again. I'm moving the brush back and forth a lot more because I want it to mix in the blue. When I did the bright white, I didn't want it to mix in the blue, so I didn't move my brush a lot. Got that side a little more blended, maybe it's not enough. And instead of going straight across, I'm doing a little more of a curve to the way I pull the brush, so it looks a little more like a cylinder would, a little more curved. And then I just want a little bit over here. Because if it goes from white to straight blue, it's going to look a little too fake. So there we go. There's the highlight side. Now I need the shadow. And the shadow is going to, again, go really close to the edge, but I don't want to necessarily paint all the way to the blue edge of my cylinder, because then it's going to look cartoony. It's going to have too much black. So I got the black, got some blue. Mix the shade. And it's starting to dry, so I need to work a little faster than I was before. This corner is going to be a little heavier because it curves around. Then I'm going to wipe it off. Black is so strong, I'm going to actually use some water. And then go back to just a little blue on the tip of my brush so that it'll start to blend a little better with that black. If you make a mistake and it's just, you're just looking at it and you're like, it's just too much, it's just not right. Instead of continuing to brush and work in like I'm doing right now, this is going to work if you're liking the way it's going. But if it's gone too far, everything's going to keep mixing together while it's wet. If you really just don't like the way it's going, let it dry and come back to it tomorrow or the next day. Come back to it when it's dry and you can just cover up what you're not liking and just go at it again. If you really can't stand it, you can always paint it blue again and restart. You may have to do that, especially on your first couple objects. I would start with simple things that are more circular or more a plain shape you already know. Something like a strawberry or some other, things that are not a perfect shape you've studied before are going to be a little trickier to do. So again, I'm going to do the shadow. And even though a shadow is going to, you'd think would be mostly blue from the can, I'm still going to add that orange and blue complementary color mixture because it's going to be really important to make that shadow. I don't want it to look orange though. I don't want it to look like a pumpkin shadow or something. So make sure I'm not doing too much of that over here because you do get some of the color of the object. So this shadow color should be a little more blue than the one that had more orange to it. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to add a teeny bit more black. Cool, now this one is going to have more of a straight edge because my object has more of a straight edge. I want to bring it just to the bottom. and then kind of go out. Now I want it to go the same angle, so this needs to go a little more this way. And some shadows could be longer if the light is lower, but this one's pretty short, so we're going to keep it kind of stout, kind of short. It's going to get narrower, and then the top of it might be a little more rounded than the actual can. Paint right up to the edge so that it really pops. And again, if those colors are too wet, that's totally fine. Wait till they dry a little bit. It's not as important that this part is done while it's wet. It's really just the object. Now my shadows are two different colors, but because the objects are two different colors, that should really work in my favor. Should help it look more realistic as it dries. So that's my really fast tutorial on how to make your still life objects look much more round in 3D with highlight shadows and then that kind of neutralized complementary color mix.